Welcome back. I hope everyone's doing great. I was out at a restaurant a few days ago. A friend of mine invited me out, and we went out. And I just go through the motions. I order my food, I pay, and I leave. And it wasn't until I got home that I realized that I paid with a debit card, and they charged me 3% for using a debit card. And basically, it came out to $1.14. Well, when did all this start happening? I noticed other restaurants do 25 cents or something, and I thought it was supposed to be convenient. But now we have to start paying more for convenience. And, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but my thought is if you have to charge for something like running a transaction as a debit card or credit card, why not just hide it in the price of your meal or something? Like, for example, take all your soft drinks or all your coffee or whatever you're drinking and mark it up by 2 or 3 pennies. You know, okay, I'm sorry, we don't do pennies anymore. We'll mark it up by 5 cents. No one's going to complain if you pay $2.90 for a glass of tea or if you pay $2.95. They're not going to notice it, but they sure notice it when you add it to the end and say, oh, you owe $1.14 because we had to run your card. And where's the 3% coming from? I mean, 3%, it costs you the same to run the card, whether it's one, glass of tea and a plate of nachos, or if it's a whole Red Lobster meal with everything on it. Why do you get charged a percentage of the bill? I just don't understand that logic. My thought is start paying with cash. But then that also got me thinking too about these tips, and I understand waitress and waiters rely on tips. I get that, and I have a real dislike towards this tip culture where everyone has to be tipping, even if it's a buffet and you're feeding yourself, doing everything else. Why in the world are we tipping people when we're doing all the work? It's one thing when someone comes in and they wait on you, they take your order, and they're nice and pleasant. That becomes more personable, and they're going their extra mile. I have no problem giving a tip. But when they're rude and they treat you like garbage and they're just there because they have to be and they're not pleasant, why give them a tip? A tip is above and beyond your normal bill. It's something you do out of the heart. It's like a gratitude. You're grateful that this person was not only taking care of you, but they were actually fun to be around. They were enjoy. I had several waitresses or waiters that I've dealt with over the years that were just absolutely fun, and I would leave them a decent tip. And I have some that were just downright rude, and they just wouldn't do anything, and they would complain and make it sound like you know I was more of a bother than what it was worth. I'm not going to give them a tip. I'm sure that's going to ruffle a few feathers, but I'm just not. It used to be where a tip was just something someone do. There was no expectation of a tip. But lately, I've been seeing a trend of this lately, and I actually ran across this sign on the internet, and it says, "Please understand, our servers make $3.50 an hour." Okay, well, in my opinion, that's the company's issue, not mine. I mean, if they're only going to pay them $3.50, that's their issue. But it says they make $3.50 an hour. Their paychecks are based on your tips. Their paycheck should not be based on my tips. Their paycheck is based on what you're paying them. My tip is above and beyond because they went above and beyond the call of duty. And then, as you can see, it gives an example of, what what bill was, and their minus their pay and expected tip. It shows all this, as you can see. And then it goes on, and this is what I think is funny. It goes on to say, it is not a handout. It's how we serve. Please be kind, be fair, and tip accordingly. If you cannot afford to tip, you cannot afford to dine out. Now that makes no sense to me. You want me to pay you extra on what you think it should be. That's just ridiculous. I mean, a tip is above and beyond. And there again, I base it off of the person. But why are we paying waitress and waiters such low wages? Why are we paying them? You know, it's not even minimum wage. I mean, it is minimum wage for the tip or the wet restaurant industry, I guess, but that's just wrong. They should get paid minimum wage, and then their tips are above and beyond. That you would have a lot more happy waiters and waiters helping you out, I feel like. But look at this next one. This is, dear guest, your server is not a volunteer. We do not work for free. We do not serve for free. And then it goes on to show you the, the bill and their pay and stuff. And there again, it says, if you can't afford to tip, you can't afford to eat out. Who's making up these rules? Where's all this stuff coming from? But this next one I thought was just, you just want to reach out and slap someone, because this is an actual receipt. And as you can see, the total was $186, and there's no tip. Now, I want to clarify one thing before I get into this one, is when I go to a restaurant, I prefer to tip in cash. I don't always tip on a debit card. The reason being is they have to go through their place of employment to get their tip and all this stuff. Or if I give them the cash, they can just slip it in their pocket and it's done, and it's theirs. And now I'm not sure how this new tax-free tips work, but my understanding is that if it's on a credit card or a debit card, they have to pay taxes. But if it's cash, they do not have to report it and pay taxes. Therefore, there's another reason to do it. And like I said, I always try to do cash if I can. And for some reason, or one of the reasons is because if I do a cash tip and I don't leave a tip on the credit card, debit card, they never know whether I left a tip or not. They can, if the service is bad, I don't want to leave a tip, then I can go up and pay, and they can make the assumption I left a cash tip on the table. I mean, that's just my thinking, because it's wrong for them to expect you to tip when it's something that should be done out of the goodness of your heart. I know I'm getting on my soapbox, but one of the other things that irritate me is when they come up with their little computer iPad and they punch and they hand it to you, and it has tip, and it always pre-calculated, and they stand there and they watch you do all this. The tip should be a private thing. I don't need them to sit there and watch me. It's a guilt trip is what it is. But if you look at this receipt here, the total bill was $186.96. And then they even put on there, how dare you tip $0? We have already called the police. Really? You're going to call the police because no one left you a tip? I don't know. I got a word for that. It's called moron. Who in the right mind is going to call a cop, call the police on someone who refuses to tip because maybe they had bad service? Maybe they didn't have any extra money. Maybe they were down on the luck and they only had $10 and their bill came up to $9.50, whatever. You don't know the situation, and it's just wrong. And so this next bill, if you actually look at this, this one blew my mind too. It says, I don't know where this is from, but it says all F&B purchases are subject to an automatic service charge. And it says the service charge is not a tip or gratuity. Well, if you look at the bill, you can see it says service charge is $10. If the service charge is not a gratuity or a tip, then what is it? Why am I paying $10? What is that, just for the pleasure of eating at your restaurant? I think that's what my bill's for, my food. I'm paying for the food and the drinks, whatever. That's what I'm paying you for. Why are you charging me a service charge, I guess, I would not go there. I would definitely not go there. But some of the places I've been to, and I saw this on the internet, and I've been really checking this, and I have not personally run across this myself. But if you look on the screen, you'll see that this this receipt has the tip suggestion at the bottom. It has an 18, or excuse me, it has a 15%, 20%, and 25%. Now, there's two ways that I can look at this, and either way, it doesn't add up. So if I assume that they take the percentage off of the ticket before taxes, you can see that the total, or excuse me, the subtotal was $14.99. Well, if you do the math, 20% of that is $2 or 2.998. So let's just say $3. So 20% of that is $3. Well, if you look at the bottom, 20% they're saying is $4, and it should be $24 tip. Okay. If I look at that as, okay, well, maybe they're including the tax as well. So let's go down to the total, which is $16.23. That 20% of that is $3.25. So how are they still coming up with $4? I mean, that's just a little bit over 15% if you want to look at it that way. How are they coming up with $4 for 20%? You really got to start checking this stuff. I don't understand why it's getting this way, why they're having to secretly hide money. And I know a lot of people don't really do the math. They want it done for them. But when you look at this, and you can do simple math like, 10%, you just move the decimal over one place, and then 20% would be that twice. I mean, that's going to be 20% of the bill. And it doesn't matter if you take it from the subtotal or the total before or after taxes. It should still match something. And I don't know. I don't understand why they're doing it. And then you got these places that you do all the work. Say, for example, like Subway. You go in there, you're paying for a meal, and their job is to sit there and literally make your sandwich the way you want it. So when you're done, why do they have a tip jar? And I know my daughter would get a kick out of this because she works at Dunkin' Donuts. Okay, you're paid to work at Dunkin' Donuts. Why do you have a tip jar? I mean, seriously, you're paid minimum wage or whatever wage you're getting, which is not $3 an hour. I mean, it's at least minimum wage. Why do you have a tip jar? And why are you expected to get tips when you're there doing your job? If anything, if you go to a hamburger stand or like Burger King, McDonald's, if anything, the one who should be getting the tip is the one who's making the food because they're the one making it. And if it's good, they should be getting the tip. But these places, this tipping culture has just got way out of hand. You have to, they want you to tip for everything and anything anymore. I work in an office. You don't see me with a tip jar on my desk saying, hey, please tip me. Not that anyone would ever see it because no one comes into the office, but the point being is, why are we having tips for everything? I just don't get it. I understand people that go into restaurants and they play the piano and they have a tip jar. And that's just kind of their own. They're not getting paid to pay the piano. They're just allowed a time frame that they can come and make. I get that. That's fine. But this is just a message out to all the restaurant owners and people at the restaurants is, if you pay your employees a decent wage, at least state minimum wage, we wouldn't have this issue. People would tip. They're doing the same job. And I want to leave on one more note that just kind of, this whole thing has just gotten to me. One more thing before I go is, why is it a percentage? Why is there a percentage that they want for a tip? let's think about this logically. Okay, I go into let's just say, I don't know, some local mall pop type store, and I can get a hamburger, fries, and something to drink, and maybe it's about $12. Okay, if I was to pay a 10% tip on that, that'd be $1.20. But if I go to a fancy restaurant and I get, the hamburger, fries, and a Coke or a drink, whatever, at a fancy restaurant, and it costs me, say, $25, $30, why should that person get a bigger tip than the mall paw store when they're doing it's the same food and they're doing the same amount of work? The lady or the gentleman, the waiter, waitress comes up, they take your order, they go back, they come back, they fill your drinks, they bring you your food, and that's it. That happens at both restaurants. So why is it that if it's a more expensive restaurant, why in the world am I paying more than a flat rate? I guess I don't understand that. I always do just a flat rate. I don't care how expensive the meal is or how cheap it is. I like to do just a flat rate. And the other thing too is when some of these waitresses and waiters, they don't make hardly anything. My daughter was a waitress for a while, and she made $2.25 an hour plus tips. Now, if she was like on a shift where she had to like take a break, someone else filled in or something, she had to split tips with that other one. So now you're taking your tips and splitting it in half. But my oldest daughter, she worked at a restaurant and they shared their tips. So all the tips would go into a jar, and then at the end of the day, they split it up between everyone equally. Now, I'm sorry, that's just wrong. When you got people that are, just busting it, trying to get, good tips and doing a great job, and you have the others that are just lazy and rude, why should they get the same amount for those that are working harder? I just don't get it. There's something wrong with this tipping culture, and we need to fix it. We either just stop tipping, which I don't want to do because I know it helps them out, but until they get this under control, something's got to happen. They need more wages. Well, I guess I'll get off my soapbox now and let you guys go. Have a great week, and I'll see you on the next one. God bless.